Hello class 10th. Now we are going to start with chapter number 14 of your textbook, which is statistics. This year we shall be learning how to find out the mean, median and mode for grouped data. Last year you learned how to find out the mean for ungrouped data. Before we proceed, let us revise whatever we have learned about mean, median and mode. First of all, I would like to discuss with you the types of data that we have. So we have two types of data, broadly classifying. One is the ungrouped data and the other one is the grouped data. Under ungrouped data, we further have two categories. There is individual series and then there is discrete series. Now, what do we mean by individual series? Individual series means a data in which each observation appears only once. An example for this would be first 5 multiples of 2. So if I write down the first 5 multiples of 2, the list would be 2, 4, 6, 8 and 10. Now in this list, each observation appears only once. So this type of data will be called individual series, and this falls under the category of ungrouped data. Then you have discrete series. Discrete series is one in which one or more than one observations may repeat. One such example could be if you write down the weights of the students of your class. There is a possibility then that one or more than one values repeat. So in that case, the observation will have a frequency. Frequency means the number of times the observation appears in the data. So I'll just write an example. You have been familiar with this type of table. You've been given some observations and you write down the frequency for them. So you could write down, if we are noting down the observations as weights for the students of your class in kilograms, and the frequency will tell us how many students have the particular weight. So let's start with the minimum value as 40. How many students are there? Let's say there are 3 students who weigh 40 kg, then 41. So let us say there are 5 students who weigh 41 kg. Then we could have 42 number of students for this weight, and then so on. So observations and the frequency, this is called discrete series. Now what we can do is, this discrete series can be organized in the form of a table using groups, and then it will become grouped data. And how I can group this? I could write the weights in the form of groups known as class intervals. So what I'll do is, depending on the observations, I can simply make groups. I am making groups for up to 5 kg. So 40 to 45 kg, I will write down how many students are there. The next group could be 45 to 50, then 50 to 55, so on. You are familiar with this. Right now we are not focusing on this. Let's focus on these two. For the first time when you learn to find out the mean for data given, the simplest formula that's taught to you is sum of observations divided by number of observations. So if you had to find out the mean for the first 5 multiples of 2, what you will do is you'll add all these values and divide by the number of observations. So the mean, which we represented by x bar, will be given by sum of observations divided by number of observations. And you add the values. The sum will be divided by 5 because there are 5 values, and you obtain your answer. Now what happens in case of discrete series, we'll have to note down how many times each observation appears. I cannot simply find out the mean by adding these observations. One such question can be considered. You did last year. Let's take an example. If you had the observations as 5, 10, 15, 20 and 25, and each of these observations appears respectively 7, 6, 8, 4 and 5 times. So we had a list in which 5 is appearing 7 times, 10 is appearing 6 times, 15 is appearing 8 times, 20 appears 4 times and 25 appears 5 times. To find out the mean for this data, what I could do is I could use the old formula, sum of observations divided by number of observations. But the problem with this is I'll have to write down all these values, the number of times they are appearing. So I'll have to write down 5 7 times. Then I'll have to write down 10 6 times. So on, I would be writing down all these values, respective number of times, and then divided by the total number of observations. And the total number of observations is given by the total of the frequencies, which is represented by summation of frequencies. This is sigma sign, a Greek letter. This represents sum. So sum of the frequencies will give me the total number of observations. Now this also is a very tedious task if you had to find the mean for large numbers or in which the frequency is more than 10. We learnt an easier way of doing this. What we learnt was, if we have the frequencies for the observations, what we can do is we can find out the sum for each observation individually, and that is given by the product of the observation with its frequency. If 5 appears 7 times, its total will be, so 5 added 7 times, so 5 into 7 will give me 35. Then 10 appearing 6 times, the total will be 60. 15 appearing 8 times, the total would be 120. And then 20 appearing 4 times, the total is 80. 25 appearing 5 times, the total is 125. And when I have to add all these observations, then the total can be calculated from here, the total of these products, which comes out to be 420. So this is the summation of all observations, which was obtained by the product of observation with its respective frequency. Each observation is multiplied with its respective frequency, and then products are added. The total of this products gives us the sum of all observations, and then with the help of the total of the frequencies, I would know how many observations are there. In this case, there are 30 observations. And to find out the mean, I will use this formula, sum of observations, which is represented by the product of observation with its frequency, summation xi into fi over sum of the frequencies, which is this. So this represents sum of all observations, and this represents the number of observations. So The total of the observations is 420 and the number of observations is 30. Simplifying, the mean comes out to be 14. So this is what we did last year. Now we are going to extend our knowledge of the calculation of mean to find out the mean for grouped data. Grouped data means if you have data in the form of class intervals, how would you find out the mean for the same? There are three methods that we will discuss for this. For calculation of mean of grouped data, there are three methods. The first one is the direct method. Then second is shortcut method, or we called it the assumed mean method. And the third one is step deviation. Now let us see how we will use direct method to find out the mean of grouped data. For this, I'm taking an example. Suppose you have the classes as 1 to 3, 3 to 5, 5 to 7, 7 to 10. And the respective frequencies are 9, 22, 27 and 17. Now the first step is, from the classes you need to find out the class mark. Class mark, or what you call it, midpoint of the class. I hope you remember how we used to find out the class mark. Class mark is calculated using sum of the lower limit and the upper limit divided by 2. So the class mark for this class will be 1 plus 3 divided by 2, which will be 2. 3 plus 5 divided by 2, it's 4. 5 plus 7 divided by 2, it's 6. 7 plus 10 divided by 2, it will be 8.5. And these class marks are represented by xi. Since our observations are grouped in the classes, we do not know what our individual observations are. And what we assume is that all the observations are concentrated at the center or the middle of the class interval. For that, before we calculate mean in using any of the methods, the first thing we want to do is we want to find out the midpoint of each class interval. The midpoint of the class interval or the class mark, add the limits, divide by 2. You will obtain the class marks, and this will be xi, our observations. The class mark will act as the observations for the data. And then the frequencies as such, fi, the first frequency is 9 for the first class, then 22, then 27, then 17. Now the direct method is the same which we used to find out the mean for discrete series. Once you have obtained the class mark from each of the classes, ignoring this, what you can consider is that this is now discrete series. You have some observations and you have the respective frequencies. How would you find out the mean? This was your step 1, find out the class mark. Then you have your step number 2. You find out the product of each of these class marks with their respective frequencies. So if I just highlight for remembering, so this is step number 1, find out the class mark. This is step number 2, calculate the product of class mark with the respective frequency. So this comes out to be 18, 88, 162. Then this will be 144.5. Then comes step number 3. Step number 3 is to find out the total for frequencies, total for these products. So this will be represented by sum of frequencies, and this will be represented by sum of the products. So this is step number 3, to find out the sum of observations and the number of observations. This is sum of observations and this is number of observations. So the number of observations here is 75 and the sum of observations comes out to be 412.5. And then we have finally step number 4, where we apply the formula to find out the mean. The mean represented by x bar will be given by sum of observations represented by summation xi fi over the number of observations represented by summation of the frequencies. This is 412.5 divided by 75. So simplifying this, you get the answer as 5.5. Now let us do a question using second method. If you had to find out the mean of group data, the data which is in the form of class intervals, with the help of shortcut method or assumed mean method, the second method that we have, we will be working with an example. Let us say you've been given the daily wages for some workers. The daily wages given in rupees. The classes are 400 to 420, 420 to 440, 440 to 460, 460 to 480, 480 to 500. And then the number of workers getting these wages are 12, 14, 8, 6 and 10 respectively. Now if I had to use direct method to find out the mean for this group data, what I would do is, from my class intervals, first of all I'll obtain the class mark. This will be obtained with the help of the class intervals. The number of workers which represents the frequency will be used with the class mark, and the product of these two would be calculated. So I'll be multiplying the frequencies with the respective class mark. I'll obtain the products. These products will be added and total will give me the sum of observations. The total of this product will be divided by the total of frequencies. The total of frequencies tells me the number of observations. So I'll be using these two to find out the mean in case of direct method. Now I am going to reduce the calculation work. I want to reduce the calculation work, so I will be doing a few extra steps here. I'll be reducing the value so that when I apply the formula for the mean, the work is easier than it would be in case of direct method. Going over the steps again, this is step number 1. Just like direct method, find out the class mark for each of the classes. Let's do that. So the class mark will be the sum of the lower limit and the upper limit divided by 2. This comes out to be 410, 430, 450, 470 and 490. This was your step number 1. Second step in case of shortcut method is to assume the mean. So we will assume that any of these observations, any of these xi's, the class marks, any of these values is the mean. Assumingly, that value will be referred to as assumed mean and will be represented by letter A. You could use small a or capital A as you wish. So these 5 values, you could take any one as the assumed mean. I am taking the middle one as the assumed mean. This is your second step. Assume a value as mean. The value will be assumed from the list of xi's, the class marks. Then you have your third step. Third step, instead of doing this, we have third step, which is to find out deviations. The word deviations means differences. Differences will be calculated of these values with the assumed mean. So each of these values minus the assumed mean. So you will be subtracting this assumed mean 450 from each of these observations one by one and obtain the answers. And these answers will be referred to as deviations. deviations will be represented by the letter D, each observation minus the assumed mean. So xi minus a, 410 minus 450. I'm writing down in detail here. You could avoid this if you want. So the first observation is 410 xi. The first xi is 410 minus the assumed mean is 450. This gives you minus 40. Then go for the second one, 430 minus 450. At every step you have to subtract 450. So this is minus 20. 450, the third observation, subtract 450 from itself. This gives you 0. 470 minus 450, this gives you 20. Then 490 minus 450 gives you 40. Now the xi's have been reduced to these values comparatively. Now you can see the values are reduced. That means our calculation will also reduce. Then comes step 4. Step 4 will be to find out the product of it will be to find out the product of fi with di. Earlier we used to find out the product of fi and xi. Now xi have been reduced to di. So I'll be ignoring this. I'll not be using xi anymore. I'll be using frequency with the new values, these values. fi and di, I'll obtain the products. Let's multiply the first frequency with the first deviation. This gives me minus 480. Second frequency with second deviation, minus 280. Third frequency with third deviation, 0. Fourth frequency with fourth deviation, 120, which is positive. The last frequency with the last deviation, which gives me 400. Now I will calculate the total of these products and the total of frequencies. Let's find out the total for these products. Add the negative values separately and the positive values separately. The total of the negative values comes out to be minus 760. The total of the positive values comes out to be 520. Solving these, the total is minus 240. Don't forget the signs, be very careful. These will affect your answer. The total of the frequencies will give me the number of observations, which is 50 in this case. This is the sum of frequencies and this is the sum of the products. The products were obtained by multiplying the frequencies with deviations. Now I apply the formula to find out the mean. The formula is a little different than the direct method. The formula is this product instead of fi xi, the product of frequency with observation. Now I have the product of the frequency with the deviation. I'll be using the total of these products divided by the number of observations. A slight change here, the values which were subtracted. I had a value as assumed mean. I subtracted this value from all of these xi's. I need to make that adjustment here. So the value which was subtracted will be added back. So I'll be adding the assumed mean back to this quotient. This is how I'll be using shortcut method. Let's use the values and find out the mean. Assumed mean was 450 plus the product of frequency with deviations totaled gives me minus 240 over number of frequencies, which is 50. Solving this, solve this first and then add with 450. So this gives me 4.8 subtracting 445.2. So this is the average value or the mean value using shortcut method or assumed mean method for grouped data.